Today was the big question before the court about the constitutionality of the individual mandate component of the Affordable Health Care Act. This is the question that everybody's been talking about for 2 years. Has Congress exceeded its Commerce Clause power by forcing people to purchase health insurance? Solicitor General Don Verrilli immediately just gets, bombed by Justices Samuel Alito, Antonin Scalia. People had thought Scalia's vote was perhaps in play, but I think after today it's fairly clear he's not. I will also add that Scalia was the first justice to drop the broccoli bomb this morning and say that, in fact, if you can force people to purchase health insurance, can't you force them to buy broccoli and join gyms? So he gets really pummeled, I think, in the first part of the argument. We saw a lot of Justices Elena Kagan and Stephen Breyer trying to prop up his argument, but it was clear that he had a rough sledding. Not surprisingly, the real eyes today were on Justice Anthony Kennedy. He is typically seen as the swing voter at the court, but today I think it's fair to say he really is the pivot around which everything is going to turn, and he voiced an enormous amount, I think, of discomfort with the individual mandate. One of his questions opened with, assume this is unprecedented, which pretty much lays out that he accepts the proposition that nothing like this has ever happened. He and the Chief Justice, John Roberts, were the two that everybody was watching today. They asked an enormous amount of questions of Verrilli, asking him for some limiting principle. If Congress can do this, can they also do that? If Congress can do this, where does it end? And that was clearly an anxiety that they had on that side of the case. I think one of the interesting things was to see when Paul Clement and Michael Garvin were speaking for the other side, Kennedy was a good bit quieter. And interestingly, although Chief Justice Roberts, again, all eyes on Roberts and Kennedy, although Chief Justice Roberts was pressing them for their side of the case, Roberts always framed it in terms of the government says X, how do you respond? So you didn't have a sense that this was Roberts voicing his own concerns with the challengers. He was voicing the concerns of the government, and I think to some degree that revealed that these weren't really necessarily existential problems he was grappling with. I think it's fair to say what I saw coming out of there was that everybody seems to think they either definitively saw a court striking down the mandate by a 5-4 margin or a court definitively upholding it by a 6-3 margin. Again, Kennedy and Roberts, the two in play. But it was interesting that I heard nobody say anything in between. Those are the two scenarios people seem to be positing. It turns less on what we saw in there today, because what we saw in there today has nothing to do with what's going to happen in the private conference on Friday, and nothing to do with what each of these justices is thinking about striking down a signature piece of legislation. So I think this was a very, very enormous and elaborate piece of theater, but I think unlike a lot of cases where there's some predictability between what happened at argument and what's going to happen, I think that the grandeur of all this led some of the justices to ask the kinds of questions they may not have asked on both sides of the case. So I think there's going to be some sense that maybe even though Justice Kennedy looked like he was on the fence, this is a big, big deal, what he's poised to do, and that may kind of come out in the wash, if not in the argument.